Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is about the Russia-Ukraine war and an act of betrayal. Betrayal by whom, you ask? I am talking about Pakistan. And you know who is getting betrayed by Pakistan? None other than its iron brother, its so-called all-weather friend, China. Pakistan is planning to send tanks to Ukraine. And the question is, will Beijing call out Islamabad's deceit? On Gravitas tonight, we tell you why Pakistan is planning to send these tanks in the first place, what's behind the move, and how this changes the dynamics between Pakistan and China, and why there is more than what meets the eye here. Also on the show for you tonight, a deadly fungus is wreaking havoc in the United States. We tell you all that you need to know and why it is a growing cause of concern. China's peace proposal in focus as Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping discuss the Russia-Ukraine war. Will China be able to play peacemaker? America loves to preach to the world. It has once again lectured India on human rights. Tonight on Gravitas, we expose America's hypocrisy on human rights. Have your steps decreased during the pandemic and as a result of COVID-19? A new study raises concern about the impact that COVID-19 has had on our walking habits. The saddest thing about betrayal must be the shock. They say that the Chinese have learned the art of being phlegmatic. If President Xi Jinping, who is in Moscow to show solidarity with President Putin at the height of the Ukraine crisis, was shocked upon hearing the news, he kept a straight face, at least in public. But he must have been shocked to learn that he had been betrayed by Pakistan, that too in the cruelest way possible. When you are in the headlights of international diplomacy, the world has just learned that Pakistan, obeying orders from Washington, is selling tanks to Ukraine in the midst of the war with Russia. This must be the ultimate betrayal for China. China has nurtured Pakistan for at least 5 decades, both financially as well as politically. In fact, China describes Pakistan as its iron brother. And Pakistan would not have survived had it not been for Chinese checkbooks. We all know that. But while Xi Jinping is in Moscow to discuss his grand peace plan with his friend Vladimir Putin, Pakistan is arming the enemy of China's friend, Ukraine, with the one weapon that Ukraine is desperate for, that's tanks. And no, these are not ordinary tanks, by the way. They are state-of-the-art battle tanks. You heard that right. Cash-strapped Pakistan may not have money for food and fuel for its people, but it always had money for anything that the army demanded. And it has decided to sell them to Kyiv. But the question is, why? And the answer, to put it simply, is money. But that is not the only answer. And we'll tell you more about that in just a bit. First things first, let's look at the tanks that it is giving to Ukraine. These are T-80UD main battle tanks, or MBTs as they are called, an improved version of the Soviet-made T-80. The term UD here stands for Ukrainian diesel, as the tank was powered by a diesel engine, and that is only manufactured in Ukraine. These tanks were first introduced in the year 1987, and they were sold by Kyiv to various countries, and Pakistan was one of them. In 1996, it bought over 320 of these tanks from Ukraine, and it now plans to give 44 of them back to its seller to help Ukraine counter the Russian offensive. But the question again is, what's in it for Pakistan? What does it get in return for this? Well, in exchange for giving tanks to Ukraine, Pakistan is seeking financial assistance, loans and credit lines from Western countries. And the key to Western financial help lies in Washington, as you all know. Pakistan's economy is in the ICU. Foreign reserves are at an all-time low, and the national debt is touching the skies. So, you see, Pakistan is desperate. Its Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has said that it is embarrassing for him to travel around the world with a begging bowl. And now he has learned an old lesson, that beggars cannot be choosers. That is the price that it must pay. You see, Ukraine is desperate for tanks, but the Western nations no longer have enough in either their service or their reserves to supply Ukraine. And so Pakistan has to arm Ukraine with tanks for its command units. But by doing so, Pakistan is double-crossing China. The question is, why would Pakistan bite the very hand that feeds it? What really are its compulsions? Are they purely financial in nature? Or does this indicate a diplomatic reset? Is Pakistan going back under the sway of Washington? Has it decided that having milked China dry, it now needs to go west in order to survive? Another question. Was this decision made by the Pakistani army or by its civilian government? Because this is not an isolated incident after all. Pakistan has been sending weapons to Ukraine for quite some time now. In fact, in November last year, a report emerged. It said that Ukrainian specialists had visited Islamabad to discuss technologies for creating nuclear weapons. And the same month, Pakistan's then Army Chief, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, traveled to the United Kingdom, apparently to discuss the supply of Howitzer D-30 munitions to Ukraine. And it did not end there. This was followed by a report from Eurasian Times. It alleged that arms dealers based in Islamabad had reportedly been in touch with a Bulgarian defense group to ensure third-party supply of weapons to the Ukrainian government. And in a similar development, a Ukrainian company based in Kyiv had apparently contacted a cargo firm in Pakistan to secure the supply of gloves for the Ukrainian army. In January 2023, another report had emerged. It said that Pakistan was playing Judas to Russia, a biblical figure notorious for betraying Jesus. And the report says that since August 2022, Pakistan had been giving batches of weapons to Ukraine, including rockets, artillery, and primers. And then in February 2023, these visuals had emerged. They showed rockets that are used in multi-barrel launchers. Pakistan had reportedly sent 10,000 such rockets to Ukraine. They were apparently routed to Kyiv via ports in Poland and Germany. And just last week, the Economic Times published a report. It said that Pakistan had recently shipped arms to Ukraine in a vessel bearing the American flag. I repeat here, weapons from Pakistan are going to Ukraine on board vessels bearing the American flag. So I ask again, Has Pakistan abandoned China and become a full-fledged American military ally again? Whatever be the case, one thing is absolutely certain. Pakistan's veneer of pretend neutrality in this war has collapsed. Its mask has come off, its deception is out in the open. We wonder what could possibly come next. Will Russia and China punish Pakistan for its deceit? We shall find out soon enough. Dependence makes you do things that many may consider immoral. Be it stabbing an all-weather ally in the back or doing business with a country you are fighting a proxy war with. France, for example, it is one of the loudest supporters of Ukraine. It is sending military aid to Ukraine, urging the entire world to support Kyiv. But secretly, France is also doing business with Russia. Is that breaking news? Or did you see this one coming? Let me get to the story. Yesterday, a curious cargo arrived in the French port of Dunkirk. This cargo was seen being unloaded from a Russian vessel. This ship had set sail from St. Petersburg, Russia. What was it really carrying? Enriched uranium, 25 cylindrical containers full, packed especially for France from Russia with love. The same Russia, by the way, that France is engaged with in a proxy war in Ukraine. And France was also one of the first countries, remember, to condemn Russia for invading Ukraine. On the 24th of February 2022, the French President Emmanuel Macron had asked Russia, remember, to quote-unquote immediately put an end to its military operation, adding that France stands in solidarity with Ukraine, it stands by the Ukrainians and is working with its partners and allies to end the war. And that has been the French narrative ever since, that Paris is doing all that it can to end the war. Secretly, though, at the same time, France has actually been giving money to Russia, striking business deals with Russia for enriched uranium. In fact, Paris has bought at least 7 cargoes of enriched uranium from Moscow since the start of the war, as per a claim. I repeat, 7 cargoes of enriched uranium. You know what's the irony of it all? The cargo enriched uranium, a material used for nukes. But France is using Russian uranium to run its nuclear power plants. Normally, though, France would not import so much uranium from Russia. But according to a Greenpeace report, France has tripled its imports of Russian uranium in 2022, tripled them. And guess what else happened early in 2022? Russia went to war with Ukraine, the same war that France condoned, that same war for which it sanctioned Russia. And just last month, the French finance minister was in India when he told an Indian news outlet that these sanctions have been effective. Sure, they have. I don't know if you realize, but what we have here is a classic case of hypocrisy. And let me tell you that this hypocrisy is not endemic to France, because hypocrisy is a European habit. All the sanctions, all that criticism, all the tall talks of supporting Ukraine later, Europe continues to import at least a quarter of its diesel from Russia, at least a quarter. This is as of January 2023. In fact, in February, Europe placed an embargo on Russian oil products. And then in March, this report claimed 44 million cubic meters of Russia gas worth well over $100 million is passing through Ukraine into Europe. Europe has given itself time till 2027 to cut all use of Russian oil and gas. 2027. That's ample time to waste and to hope the war ends, because when it does, it may not take too long for Europe to take a U-turn on its plan. Also, earlier this month, another report said Germany remains one of the top buyers of Russian crude oil. Any idea who else features on that list? The Netherlands, Italy, Poland, France, Belgium, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Spain, Greece. And you know what's common between these countries? They all swear to be supporting Ukraine in the war. They are the loudest cheerleaders of the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who, by the way, had pleaded before the European Parliament last March, saying, quote unquote, please do not sponsor the weapons of war of this country, of Russia. No euros for the occupiers. Close all your ports to them. Deny energy resources. Europe obviously could not care less, for Russian ships continue to harbor in its ports and Russian energy continues to flow through European taps as well. What would you call it if not a classic case of European hypocrisy? So you saw Pakistan's deceit and you saw France's hypocrisy. Let's now talk about the war they revolve around. How exactly is it playing out 390 days down the line? Well, to start with, things remain more or less the same. The battle for Bakhmut was supposed to be a turning point, but it seems to be going absolutely nowhere. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians seem to be making any major gains. In the Donbas region, both Russia and Ukraine have a fresh challenge. That's mud. You heard that right. It's plaguing the battlefields, disrupting the movement of both sides. You see, after a cold and snowy winter, the arrival of spring rains has brought the mud back to the battlefields. Videos shared online showing soldiers struggling to wade through trenches. In the Baltic Sea, Russia says it spotted 2 US strategic bombers that were apparently flying in the direction of the Russian border. And the Russian Defense Ministry says an Su-35 fighter jet was scrambled immediately after that sighting. And as the Americans create problems for Russia, Ukraine is facing a shortage of weapons. Look at the headline on your screen. The Ukrainian air chief says that his best pilots are dying waiting for F-16 fighter jets. Not just that, he also expressed confidence that if given a chance, Ukrainian pilots can learn to fly these jets in less than 6 months. And if we speak of the situation in Crimea, a mysterious blast unfolded there earlier today. Russian cruise missiles were destroyed in a blast. Ukraine has denied any responsibility for this incident. Then who destroyed it? Well, we are yet to hear from the Russian authorities. Because back in Moscow, the Russian president is busy hosting his friend, Xi Jinping. Earlier today, the two held wide-ranging discussions at the Kremlin. It was a pomp-laden ceremony filled with imperial grandeur and pledges of expanding ties amid the fighting in Ukraine. Did the two leaders discuss China's peace proposal as well? Yes, says Moscow. In fact, according to the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry, China's 12-point peace plan did feature in the talks between the two leaders. The Chinese representatives apparently called for de-escalation and eventual ceasefire in Ukraine. Peskov refused to elaborate further. But on Monday, the Russian president had said that he carefully studied China's ideas and viewed them with the utmost respect. But the question is, what exactly is China's 12-point plan all about? Well, let's tell you what it states. Number one is respecting the sovereignty of all countries. Number two, abandoning the Cold War mentality. Number three, ceasing hostilities. Number four, resuming the peace talks. Number five, resolving the humanitarian crisis. Number six, protecting civilians and the prisoners of war. Number 7, keeping nuclear power plants safe. Number 8, reducing strategic risks. At number 9 is facilitating grain exports. And number 10, stopping unilateral sanctions. Number 11, keeping industrial and supply chains stable. And number 12, promoting post-conflict reconstruction. Now, these are China's 12 proposals. And on its website, the country's foreign ministry has explained the idea behind each of them, with examples of how they can be implemented. The Russian leader is yet to reveal if he will be taking this plan forward, if he will really discuss ending the war. But the Americans are already spooked. They say the peace plan will not achieve much. In fact, the US Secretary of State has also warned that the world should not be fooled by this plan, that this plan will only freeze the territories seized by Moscow. He added that any plan that does not restore territory seized by Russia is a stalling tactic at best. And as this war of words continues, Ukraine is busy hosting a special guest, the Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida. He landed in Kyiv on Tuesday afternoon in a surprise visit. And the first thing he did upon landing was visit the quaint town of Bucha, a place that has become synonymous with alleged Russian atrocities. Remember, this is the first time a Japanese prime minister has visited a country or region with ongoing fighting since World War II. And the question is, at whose behest did Kishida go to Kyiv? We will discuss this in detail in our next story. Did the Japanese Prime Minister visit Ukraine on the White House's request? Well, some believe Biden may have influenced Kishida's decision to become the first post-war Japanese leader to visit a conflict zone. Even if that's true, the question one must ask is, why would Joe Biden do that? Ask Fumio Kishida to travel to Kyiv. And the answer is rather obvious. To shore up support for Ukraine, to project to the world that the war in Ukraine affects everyone, not just the West. And how does that help Joe Biden? Well, in more ways than you can think. You see, history is proof that wars have always helped the politics of American presidents. Not just that, wars have also helped them secure a second term. Let's just take a walk down the lanes of history. You will see that James Madison was re-elected during the 1812 war. Lincoln was re-elected during the Civil War, as was Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Second World War. Lyndon B. Johnson sent troops to Vietnam, and he was re-elected. And then came in Richard Nixon. The Vietnam War was still on. Nixon was re-elected. It's another story that his term ended early, courtesy the Watergate scandal. Have a look at examples as recent as George W. Bush. He invaded Iraq, and the American votes re-elected him to office with 51% to 48%. And during his second term, America invaded Afghanistan. Well, too bad the American Constitution does not allow the president to run for a third term. But what it does allow is presidents to run for a second term. And guess who is up for re-election? President Joe Biden. Will he get America directly involved in the Ukraine war for the sake of securing another term? Ideally, he should not. Biden is a career politician, and he knows better. Biden knows that a war can do America no good, especially given the current financial crisis. But you know what they say. Ambition is a dangerous weapon. So Republicans are not taking any chances at all. They are doing all that they can to take away war powers from Joe Biden. What am I talking about? A bill has been introduced in the US Congress. This bill strips Biden and US presidents after him of the power to conduct military operations without the approval of the Congress. Because currently the US president can unilaterally wage war or order military action, as Americans like to call it. And this power was given to American presidents in the year 2001, following the 9/11 attacks. The justification was rather simple. The president has the responsibility to defend America, and hence he should be given the power to order a military action. And given the post-9/11 scenario, AUMF, or the authorization for use of military force, may have made sense. But what about the years that followed? Former President Barack Obama used the power to justify the strikes in Iraq and Syria. And after Obama, Trump cited AUMF to justify the strike that assassinated the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. Could Joe Biden use the AUMF to move the American troops to Ukraine? Well, here's what the White House has to say. I'm quoting. President Biden remains committed to working with the Congress to ensure that outdated authorizations for the use of military force are replaced with a narrow and specific framework more appropriate to protecting Americans from modern terrorist threats. Towards that end, the administration will ensure that Congress has a clear and thorough understanding of the effect of any such action and of the threats facing US forces, personnel, and interests around the world. In other words, Joe Biden supports repealing AUMF. And while that is the politically correct thing to do, how will it impact Biden's political ambitions? Also, it's not just the US presidents, after all, who have historically benefited from wars. Defense companies have profited big time as well. And just to understand this, you don't need a recap of history. Let me just point you to a report that was published earlier today. What does the headline say? Ukraine war propels arms maker Rheinmetall into DAX index. DAX is a German stock market index. Have a look at the subheader now. It clearly says that since Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, the German arms manufacturer has seen its share price more than double. And I don't know how many of you know this, but Rheinmetall is the same German company that produces the cannon for Leopard 2 tanks. And not too long ago, there was a very public debate around these tanks and whether or not countries would be willing to send them to Ukraine. And thanks to that, Leopard 2 became a household name. And the result, by the way, was visible in Rheinmetall stock prices as well. They have climbed 153% since the start of the Ukraine war. And Rheinmetall is not an exception. Ever since the war broke out in Ukraine, global defense companies have received multifold orders and their stock prices have been soaring. Sweden's Saab has seen shares rising 170%. Hensoldt, 131% since the 24th of February 2022. UK's BAE Systems has seen stocks climb 50%. In news, we often say that this is the kind of story that writes itself. We are still dealing with the after effects of the Wuhan virus. Many are still not over the trauma that was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet another deadly infection is on a rise. A highly drug-resistant fungus is spreading at an alarming rate in the United States. It is called Candida auris, and it is targeting those with a weak immune system. Should you be scared? How long before it infests your country, your city, or your neighborhood? Let's just tell you more about the fungus. Candida auris is lethal. Its infection is hard to treat. The invasive yeast strain was first discovered in Japan back in 2009. A 64-year-old was diagnosed with otitis externa. It is a severe infection of the ear canal. The patient's ear discharge contained this fungus. It was found resistant to multiple antifungal drugs. And since then, the yeast has been reported in 17 countries across 5 continents. In fact, it found its way to the US in 2013, and by 2016, it had claimed 4 lives and made 9 people extremely sick. All of these patients had some underlying medical conditions. The fungus was as mysterious as it was deadly. But one thing was absolutely clear, that people with fragile immune systems were at high risk. In June 2016, Centers for Drug Control and Prevention issued a clinical alert. It requested the laboratories to extensively research the fungus. But to date, very little is known. And here is what we do know about it. Number 1, Candida can cause fatal infections in the bloodstream, heart, and the brain. Between 30 to 70% of infected hospitalized patients are estimated to die. Number 2, Candida auris is multi-drug resistant. That is what makes it so lethal, because treatments just don't seem to work against it. Drugs commonly used to treat Candida infections are futile. Some strains are resistant to all classes of antifungals. Number 3, the fungus goes undetected in a majority of the cases. Standard lab methods fail to identify Candida auris. It's very often misidentified, in fact, and this in turn leads to wrong treatments and mismanagement as well. Number 4, the fungus has caused outbreaks in healthcare settings. It has been found in long-term care hospitals, in nursing homes with patients on ventilators, and cancer patients on chemotherapy. And by the way, it is spreading at a concerning rate. And we don't mean to scare you. The CDC has again issued a fresh warning in the Annals of Internal Medicine. Just have a look at these figures. Infections have tripled in the US in just 3 years. In 2019, 479 cases were reported. In 2021, they increased to 1,471. 2,377 clinical cases and 5,754 screening cases were reported in 2022 alone. A number of people carrying the fungus but not showing any symptoms quadrupled in the same period. It went from 1,077 to 4,040. Candida auris has now been detected in more than half the states. 17 states identified their first case, in fact, between 2019 and 2021. According to the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, 8 European countries reported 335 infections in the year 2020. And that figure increased to 655 reported in 13 countries in the year 2021. And most of these cases were found in Spain and Italy. But as I said, the fungus is difficult to detect. So these are just the cases that were caught by the doctors. The actual numbers could be much higher. And here comes the worst part. If the fungus gets into a hospital, it's very difficult to control and eliminate. It persists, smolders, and causes infections for a considerable period, despite the best efforts of infection control. And above everything, the fungus continues to evolve. It is shape-shifting. It forms biofilms to resist the disinfectants. It's learning to survive in a warming world, much like the fungus in the HBO drama Last of Us. And it's difficult to not draw these parallels. By now, especially after the Wuhan virus pandemic, you might have observed a pattern when it comes to these pathogens. They start out extremely rare, and then they emerge in more and more places, and ultimately they become widespread to the point that lockdowns are imposed, economies suffer, and everything comes to a halt. Could this be the beginning of the next pandemic? Could the fungus find its way to your neighborhood? Even if it does, those who are healthy would not be at much risk. But if you suffer from chronic medical conditions, then you might want to take some precautions. Have you heard this quote? Don't complain about the snow on your neighbor's roof when your own doorstep is not clean. What does that mean? Don't point fingers at others unless you are perfect yourself. Clearly, the US does not know about it or pretends to not know about it. What makes me say that? This report. It was released by the US Department of State on Monday. It targets India. It lists significant human rights abuses in India that occurred in 2022. Let's look at some of these cases: unlawful killings, disappearances, torture, and other related abuses. It has accused the Indian government of serious corruption, of lack of accountability, and the list goes on. And now have a look at this report. This is from 2022. It says the US has been monitoring human rights abuses in India. This is what the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, had said at the time. I'm quoting. We are monitoring some recent concerning developments in India, including a rise in human rights abuses by some government, police, and prison officials. Why am I showing you all of this? Well, to highlight America's hypocrisy. Is the United States really in a position to raise questions on India regarding this matter? What about its own state? The former president of the country on the verge of being arrested, women do not have the basic choice regarding their own bodies. What can be more basic than that? States are considering death penalties on abortions. Hate crimes are on a rise. Police are being sentenced for murders. 6-year-olds are killing people by accident. And what do we even say about the arbitrary terrorism in schools? You see, we are talking about a country where you don't know when you would get shot. You could be at a music festival and bullets could come showering upon you. You could be grocery shopping or just walking around in your neighborhood and you might never make it back home. Especially if you belong to a minority. You might drop off your child at school and never see them again. So why is America fixating on India's human rights? What about caring about its own? I'll tell you why. Because the US thinks too highly of itself, that it can lecture the world on human rights, that it is above all laws. And I'll back my statement with facts. You see, it's no news that US military bases are spread across the world, but do you know the exact figure? And more importantly, do you know what happens in these bases? Well, the US controls about 750 bases in at least 80 countries worldwide. And these troops think they are beyond the law of the land. They commit all sorts of crimes. Have a look at these reports. A US Marine raped South Korean teenager. Another one raped a 14-year-old in Japan. A corporal strangled a restaurant hostess in Seoul. But the US loves to excuse these crimes. But how much can it possibly really excuse? What about the hate crimes perpetrated by its own police forces? Do I need to repeat the racism cruising through the country? The number of black people killed by the police for no clear reason? The US police shot nearly 1,100 people dead last year. 225 of them were black, 120 were Hispanic. The country calls itself a melting pot of all ethnicities, but does nothing or next to nothing to safeguard these people. And instead of focusing on its own state of affairs, it chooses to lecture others over human rights. Why release such reports for India? Why not fix its own system first? Why not count its own violations? Our next story is about India's aviation sector. There is a fresh development, a very interesting one. According to a Reuters report, India is resisting giving more air traffic rights to the UAE. I'm talking about rights for air traffic. You see, the UAE wants India to increase the maximum number of seats between the two sides. And while speaking to Reuters, India's civil aviation minister has said that India is not looking at hiking the number at this point. Let's just break it down for you. First things first, India's aviation sector at this point is flying high. It's aiming for new heights. A record number of aircraft are being ordered. India's flag carrier has been privatized. It's also on a hiring spree. Direct international air connectivity has increased. Prime Minister Modi launched the Uranium scheme. More airports are being inaugurated, and the number of frequent flyers has gone up. Basically, things are looking up for this sector. And India also wants to get back the traffic that has been lost to the foreign carriers. You see, it wants airlines to order more wide-body planes so that this demand can be met. Basically, the air travel demand has been greater than the supply of aircraft. Recently, Air India unveiled deals for 470 jets, and this includes 220 planes from Boeing and 250 from Airbus. As of now, Gulf airlines like Qatar Airways, Emirates have a major chunk when it comes to India's international air traffic. And India is looking at changing this. The Reuters report highlights the Civil Aviation Ministry's plans on this front. The minister has said, and I'm quoting, "The minute you give direct connectivity to international locations directly from Delhi, any passenger is going to prefer a direct connect rather than going through another country's hub." According to him, there is going to be an explosion of air traffic in India in the years to come. And that the main reasons for this are a growing economy, rapid urbanization, increasing disposable incomes, and growing aspirations. Let me also tell you about what happened in the year 2013, when the Indian government at that time had cleared the Jet Airways Etihad deal. Let's just talk about the air traffic rights as far as that deal was concerned. India, at that point, had sweetened the deal. It had signed a new bilateral agreement with Abu Dhabi and increased the number of weekly seats available on flights between the two sides. And how much was the increase? Almost fourfold. And there was opposition by airlines. They were not okay with the government favoring a deal by expanding the bilateral flying rights to Abu Dhabi, so that Etihad could buy the Jet Airways stake. The airports were also unhappy with the move. And you know how they looked at the move? As a step that will severely impact their efforts to put in place a global hub within the country. Well, from then to now, a lot has changed. It's a very interesting time for India's aviation sector as it tries to spread its wings further. And with this report talking about how India is resisting giving the UAE more air traffic rights, the messaging could not be clearer. India is taking a firm stand. It wants to use every opportunity available and aim higher to make its mark in the aviation space. Let me now ask you a question. Have you completed your daily number of steps? Is your step tracker just not motivating you enough these days? Have you lost the motivation to walk? Well, it looks like people are not walking enough. But what's the reason for this? Studies show it's because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It seems like the pandemic made people too comfortable on their couches and they haven't gotten their mojo back. In fact, studies show people are taking 600 fewer steps per day. And this is compared to the pre-pandemic era. The scientists say that this could cause severe harm to a person's physical health. But why is that? Studies have found that overweight people could lower their risk of obesity by 64% simply through increasing their steps in a day. But if the steps are increased from 6,000 to 11,000, people can achieve what the scientists call a healthy lifestyle. So did the pandemic also slow down aged people? While the age of a person does make a difference, the pandemic surprisingly did not affect people over the age of 60. They continued to maintain the right amount of steps, the right number. It was actually the people between 18 and 30 who were most impacted. And this has sparked concern among the health experts. The young generations make up the majority in most workplaces, and looking at the growing trend of the so-called lazy youngsters, experts suggest that people replace the regular work desks with a standing treadmill or a bike desk. In fact, companies have also started to give periodic breaks for the workers to exercise. With all this talk about how people are not taking enough steps, they're not walking enough, what is the actual number of steps we should be taking? Well, you must have heard about the magic number of 10,000 steps a day, which the experts have always recommended as the daily step goal for anyone. But where did the concept of 10,000 steps really come from? Well, it came from a pedometer which originated in Japan in the run-up to the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. It translates to 10,000 steps, which slowly became the rallying slogan for dedicated walkers. And this new concept moved from the Japanese public to the health-conscious walkers around the world. Most fitness trackers now use this concept, and health experts use Manpoke as the basic fitness goal for a regular exercise regimen. But here's something you need to know. The 10,000 step formula does not apply to everyone. The average person walks 3,000 to 4,000 steps a day and does not face any major illnesses. But the 10,000 goal is something that a person should aim to achieve. Although it might not be necessary to walk that number of steps, it does help you to live a longer life. So how can you increase your steps and reach this 10,000 target? We have a few ways you can easily get your daily steps in. Do you have a pet? Take it for a walk. This way you will be distracted from being stressed about your step count. One can also combine a walk with socializing by going out for a walk with friends. Music, for that matter, can do wonders when going out for a run. A bouncy beat and the running track can make a great combination, which will motivate you to walk further. And now comes the most simple but not so convenient one. Take the stairs. Even going down the stairs counts, as it would be burning calories and increasing your flexibility. So keep yourself on the driving seat and not your daily step counter. Keeping fit and healthy might be a painful task, but at the end of the day, it's all about no pain, no gain. And on that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
Mahti